The church bells of Silver Creek rang hollow as Katherine Lawson stood in disbelief, the carefully arranged flowers in her hands trembling like aspen leaves in a storm. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but Edgar Whitmore, the banker's son, was nowhere to be found, leaving nothing but a hastily scrawled note that the minister had reluctantly handed her moments before. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." The words burned into her mind as tears streaked down her face, ruining the careful application of rouge her mother had insisted upon that morning. The whispers filled the church as she stood frozen at the altar, her white gown suddenly feeling like a shroud. The pitying glances from the townsfolk were more than she could bear. Some were already slipping out the back doors, eager to spread the gossip throughout Silver Creek. "Poor Katherine," she heard someone murmur, "always had ideas above her station." Her father's face had turned a deep crimson, his fists clenched at his sides as he struggled to maintain his composure. Her mother had already succumbed to a fainting spell, attended to by her sister in the front pew. Katherine couldn't breathe. The church walls seemed to close in around her as the reality of her situation became clear. She had been abandoned, publicly humiliated, left to face the judgment of the entire town. Her legs finally gave way, and she sank to her knees on the church steps, the bouquet of prairie wildflowers scattering across the wooden planks. It was then, through the blur of her tears, that she noticed a pair of well-worn boots stopping before her. Looking up, she saw a face she recognized but had never truly noticed before: Fletcher Jameson, a quiet cowboy who worked the cattle drives that passed through Silver Creek. His normally weathered face was softened with concern, his blue eyes reflecting something that wasn't pity, but understanding. "Miss Lawson," he said quietly, extending his calloused hand toward her. "Let's start walking." Katherine stared at his outstretched hand. Fletcher Jameson was a man of few words around town, known more for his skill with horses than his conversation. Yet here he was, offering her an escape from this nightmare. With nothing left to lose, she placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring as he helped her to her feet. The white satin of her wedding dress rustled as she stood, the sound almost obscenely loud in the hushed church. "My things," she whispered. "We'll send for them," he replied simply, leading her down the aisle past the stunned faces of guests who parted like the Red Sea before them. Katherine's father stepped forward, his face a storm of emotions. "Katherine Louise Lawson, where do you think you're going?" Fletcher answered before she could. "She's coming with me, Mr. Lawson. She needs some air. This is outrageous." "You have no right, Pa." Katherine found her voice small but determined. "Please, I cannot stay here another minute." Her father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water, but he stepped aside, perhaps recognizing the fragile state of his daughter's composure. The bright June sunlight of 1878 hit Katherine's face as they exited the church, a stark contrast to the dim interior. Silver Creek's main street stretched before them, the normal Saturday bustle slowed as people stopped to stare at the abandoned bride and the cowboy leading her away. "Where are we going?" she asked, suddenly aware she was walking down the dusty main street in her wedding dress, her veil trailing behind her. "Wherever you need to go," Fletcher replied, his voice steady and calm. "Just away from here for now, one foot in front of the other." And so they walked, an unlikely pair making their way through Silver Creek, past the general store where Katherine had picked out her wedding china just a week prior, past the millinery where her veil had been selected with such care, past the saloon where Edgar had likely spent his last night as a bachelor. They reached the edge of town, and still they walked, Fletcher's pace never hurrying her, but moving with purpose nonetheless. The summer sun beat down on them, and Katherine felt sweat beginning to dampen her carefully arranged hair. "I must look a fright," she said suddenly, a hysterical laugh bubbling up from her chest. Fletcher glanced down at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "You look like a woman who's been through hell and is still standing. That's something, Miss Lawson." They reached a small creek that ran along the eastern edge of town. Fletcher led her to a flat rock beside the water, helping her arrange her voluminous skirts so she could sit. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared into a thicket of cottonwoods. Katherine sat alone, listening to the gentle gurgle of the creek. The reality of what had happened began to sink in. Edgar was gone. The man she had planned to build a life with had abandoned her at the altar. The shame of it would follow her forever in Silver Creek. Fletcher returned carrying his canteen and a folded handkerchief. He dampened the cloth and handed it to her. "For your face," he said simply. Katherine took it gratefully, pressing the cool cloth to her flushed cheeks, wiping away the tears and smudged makeup. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Jameson?" He sat beside her on the rock, maintaining a respectful distance. "Fletcher," he corrected gently. "And I'm helping because nobody deserves to be left standing alone like that." He paused, staring out at the water. "I know what it's like to have your future yanked away without warning." Katherine looked at him with new interest. At 22, she had seen Fletcher around town for the past few years, but knew little about him. He kept to himself, worked hard for the cattle outfits that passed through, and occasionally took odd jobs at nearby ranches. He was perhaps 5 or 6 years her senior, his face tanned and lined from long days under the western sun. "What happened to you?" she asked. Fletcher was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "War happened. I came back to find my family farm sold to pay debts, my sweetheart married to another, and not much use for a cavalry man with a bullet scar on his leg." "I'm sorry," Katherine said, suddenly feeling small in her problems. "The war has been over for 13 years. 13 years, 2 months, and 16 days, he said, but some wars never really end for those who fought them. He shook his head as if to clear it. "But that's not your burden to hear about today. What will you do now, Miss Lawson?" Katherine stared at her wedding ring still on her finger. With deliberate movements, she pulled it off and held it in her palm. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to town right away. The gossip will be unbearable. Do you have family elsewhere? An aunt in Denver," she said thoughtfully, "but traveling alone." "I could take you," Fletcher offered, then quickly added, "that is, I could escort you safely to Denver. The cattle drive I was set to join isn't leaving until next week." Katherine studied him, this quiet man who had appeared exactly when she needed someone most. "Why would you do that for me?" Fletcher's gaze met hers, steady and clear. "Because it seems like the right thing to do." 2 days later, Katherine found herself on the eastbound stagecoach to Denver, Fletcher seated across from her. Her wedding dress was packed away, replaced by a simple blue traveling dress her mother had tearfully brought to her at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, where Fletcher had secured her a room. The other passengers, a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, and a young man who claimed to be heading to the silver mines, glanced curiously at them, but asked few questions. Katherine was grateful for the respite from the prying eyes and whispers of Silver Creek. Fletcher sat quietly, his gaze often turned to the landscape rolling past the window. He had been a perfect gentleman, arranging everything for their journey with efficiency and discretion. "Have you been to Denver before?" Katherine asked as the stagecoach rattled over a particularly bumpy stretch of road. Fletcher nodded. "A few times. It's growing fast. Lots of opportunities there for someone looking to start fresh." "Is that what you think I should do? Start fresh?" He studied her for a moment. "I think you should do whatever brings you peace, Miss Lawson." "Katherine," she corrected him with a small smile. "If we're to be traveling companions, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" Something flickered in Fletcher's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "Katherine," he agreed. The journey to Denver took 3 days, with overnight stops at way stations along the route. Fletcher insisted on taking the bench outside whatever room was assigned to Katherine, sleeping sitting upright with his rifle across his lap, despite her protestations that such vigilance was unnecessary. "A woman traveling alone attracts attention," he explained simply. "Better safe than sorry." By the time they reached Denver, Katherine found herself watching Fletcher with growing curiosity. He was unlike any man she had known in Silver Creek. Where Edgar had been polished and verbose, Fletcher was straightforward and genuine. Where the men of her acquaintance sought to impress with grand gestures and flowery words, Fletcher simply did what needed doing without fanfare. Denver was a shock after the quiet of Silver Creek. The streets teemed with people, carriages jostled for position, and construction seemed to be happening on every corner. Buildings of brick and stone rose where Katherine remembered only modest structures from her last visit 5 years prior. Her Aunt Josephine's home was a tidy 2-story affair on a respectable street on the city's south side. The older woman greeted Katherine with warm embraces and exclamations of shock at her story, then turned appraising eyes on Fletcher. "And who might you be, young man?" she asked, her tone friendly but direct. "Fletcher Jameson, madam. I accompanied Miss Lawson to ensure her safe passage." "Well, Mr. Jameson, it seems I owe you my gratitude for looking after my niece in her time of need. You must stay for supper, at least." Fletcher glanced at Katherine, who nodded encouragingly. "That would be mighty kind, madam." That evening, as they sat around Aunt Josephine's dining table, Katherine watched Fletcher struggle with the array of silverware before him, discreetly following her lead. He answered her aunt's questions politely but briefly, his discomfort in the formal setting evident. Yet when the conversation turned to ranching, Aunt Josephine's late husband had owned considerable property outside the city. Fletcher came alive, speaking knowledgeably about cattle breeding, grazing techniques, and water management. "You know your business, Mr. Jameson," Aunt Josephine remarked, impressed. "My father ran cattle before the war," he replied. "Small operation, but he taught me well." After supper, while Aunt Josephine busied herself in the kitchen, Katherine and Fletcher stepped out onto the small porch. The summer evening was warm, the city sounds creating a backdrop to their conversation. "What will you do now?" Katherine asked, watching his profile in the fading light. Fletcher leaned against the porch railing. "Head back to Silver Creek tomorrow, I reckon. The Hollister outfit will be moving their herd north soon, and after that," he shrugged, "another outfit, another drive, that's the cowboy way." Katherine felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving. In the space of a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. "It seems a lonely life," she ventured. "It can be," he admitted, "but there's freedom in it too." "Freedom," she echoed. "I thought I knew what I wanted: a comfortable home, a respectable husband, children. Now I'm not sure of anything." Fletcher turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've had quite a shock. Give yourself time." "How much time did you give yourself?" "After the war." His smile was tinged with sadness. "Too much, maybe, or not enough of the right kind." Katherine impulsively reached out, touching his arm. "Thank you, Fletcher, for everything." His gaze dropped to her hand on his sleeve, then back to her face. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a current of possibility that made Katherine's heart quicken. Then Aunt Josephine called from inside, and the moment was gone. The next morning, Fletcher came to say goodbye. He stood awkwardly in Aunt Josephine's parlor, hat in hand, looking more comfortable in his traveling clothes than he had at dinner the night before. "Your aunt seems like a good woman," he said. "You'll be well looked after here." "Yes," Katherine agreed, though the thought of him leaving created a hollow feeling in her chest. "Will you? That is, would you mind if I wrote to you, to let you know how I'm settling in?" Surprise flickered across his face. "I'd like that." "You can send letters to the general delivery in Silver Creek. I check whenever I'm passing through." An awkward silence fell between them. There was so much Katherine wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. "Well," Fletcher finally said, settling his hat on his head, "I best be on my way." "Of course." Katherine walked him to the door. At the threshold, she gathered her courage. "Fletcher, I want you to know that what you did for me, I will never forget it." He studied her face for a long moment. "Be well, Katherine," he said softly. And then he was gone, his tall figure striding down the street toward the stagecoach office. Katherine wrote her first letter to Fletcher 3 days later, describing her reunion with Aunt Josephine in greater detail and her impressions of how Denver had changed. She kept the tone light, making no mention of Edgar or her broken engagement. To her surprise, a reply came within 2 weeks, delivered to her aunt's home. Fletcher's handwriting was neat but clearly unpracticed, his words direct and unembellished. He described the cattle drive north, the personalities of the men he worked with, and a thunderstorm that had nearly scattered the herd. He closed with a simple hope that she was finding peace in Denver. Thus began a correspondence that spanned the summer and into the fall of 1878. Katherine found herself eagerly awaiting Fletcher's letters, which arrived irregularly as his work took him to different parts of the territory. She shared with him her growing interest in helping at the small school where Aunt Josephine was a benefactor, and he encouraged her natural talent with children. In turn, he opened up more about his life, his experiences in the war, the loss of his family farm in Kansas, and his wanderings in the years since. With each letter, Katherine felt she was assembling pieces of a puzzle, coming to understand the quiet, honorable man who had rescued her on what should have been her wedding day. In October, unexpected news arrived from Silver Creek. Edgar Whitmore had married a banker's daughter from Colorado Springs, barely 4 months after abandoning Katherine at the altar. The news came from her mother, who clearly expected Katherine to be devastated. To her own surprise, Katherine felt only a dull ache, followed by relief. She wrote to Fletcher about it that evening. "I find I'm not heartbroken at all. Perhaps I never truly loved Edgar, but only the idea of the life he represented. Is that terrible of me? To have been ready to marry a man I didn't love deeply? I wonder now if I even knew what love was." Fletcher's reply came faster than usual. "There's nothing terrible about wanting security and respect. That's what most folks are searching for. But having seen what you're made of, Katherine, I think you deserve that and more. You deserve someone who sees your strength and your heart." Katherine read those words over and over, wondering at the warmth they kindled inside her. As winter approached, Aunt Josephine began planning a journey to San Francisco to visit her sister. "You'll come with me, of course," she told Katherine over breakfast. "The sea air will do you good, and my sister's social circle includes many eligible gentlemen." Katherine hesitated. The thought of meeting potential suitors left her cold. Her heart, she had slowly come to realize, was otherwise engaged. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would prefer to return to Silver Creek." Aunt Josephine's eyebrows rose sharply. "After everything, my dear, the gossip will be intolerable." "Perhaps," Katherine acknowledged. "But I've had time to think, and I believe running away was necessary then, but returning is necessary now. I need to face my past to move forward." What she didn't say was that Silver Creek was where Fletcher returned between jobs. That her thoughts increasingly turned to him, his quiet strength, his integrity, the way his rare smile transformed his serious face. "This wouldn't have anything to do with that cowboy of yours, would it?" Aunt Josephine asked shrewdly. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "He's not my cowboy." "MMM," her aunt hummed knowingly. "Those letters that come for you have been getting thicker, and you light up like a Christmas tree when they arrive." "Fletcher is a friend," Katherine insisted, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. "Well," Aunt Josephine sighed, "you're a grown woman of 22. If you feel you must return to Silver Creek, I won't stop you, but promise me you'll think carefully about your future." Katherine promised, though her future was all she had been thinking about for months. She wrote to Fletcher that night, informing him of her decision to return to Silver Creek after Christmas. His reply came just before the holiday. "I'll be in Silver Creek the second week of January between drives. If you're truly coming back, I'd be honored to meet your stage." On January 10, 1879, Katherine stepped down from the stagecoach onto the snowy main street of Silver Creek. The town looked smaller than she remembered, the buildings weathered against the white backdrop of winter. A few people turned to stare, recognition dawning on their faces, but Katherine held her head high. And there, waiting just as he promised, was Fletcher. He looked the same yet different, still tall and weathered, but there was an energy about him she hadn't seen before. He stepped forward as she descended, offering his hand just as he had that fateful day. "Welcome back," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed much more. "It's good to be back," she replied, meaning it despite her nervousness. They walked side by side down the street, Fletcher carrying her valise. Katherine was staying with her parents initially, though the arrangement felt temporary in ways she couldn't yet articulate. "How are they, your parents?" Fletcher asked as they approached the Lawson home, a modest house on the east side of town. "Confused by my decision to return, but supportive in their way," Katherine said. "My mother writes that Edgar's new wife is expecting a child already." Fletcher glanced at her. "Does that trouble you?" Katherine shook her head. "No, I wish them well, truly. My only regret is the public manner of our parting." They stopped at the gate to her parents' yard. Katherine wasn't ready to say goodbye, not when she had so much she wanted to say. "Are you free for supper tomorrow?" she asked impulsively. "I'd like to cook for you to thank you for everything." Fletcher looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd like that very much." The next evening, Katherine prepared a simple but hearty meal in her parents' kitchen. Her mother hovered nervously, clearly unsure what to make of her daughter inviting a cowboy to dinner. But her father seemed cautiously approving after hearing of Fletcher's protective role during their journey to Denver. When Fletcher arrived, clean-shaven and in his best shirt, Katherine felt her heart skip. They ate together, the conversation flowing more easily than she had expected. Her parents gradually relaxed as Fletcher's quiet manners and intelligence became evident. After the meal, Katherine's father surprisingly invited Fletcher to see his workshop where he crafted furniture as a hobby. Katherine and her mother cleared the table in companionable silence. "He seems a decent man," her mother finally offered. "Different from Edgar." "Yes," Katherine agreed. "Very different, and is he, that is, are you?" "I don't know what we are," Katherine admitted, "but I know how I feel when I'm with him." Her mother studied her face and then nodded, seeming to understand something significant. "Well then, I suppose we shall see what comes of it." Over the following weeks, Katherine re-established herself in Silver Creek. The initial whispers and stares gradually subsided as she held her head high, greeting everyone with polite dignity. She began assisting at the town's small school 3 days a week, discovering a talent for teaching that brought her unexpected joy. And through it all, Fletcher was there. He had taken work at the Peterson Ranch just outside town, breaking horses for the winter season. They saw each other regularly for suppers with her family, for walks through town, for quiet conversations by the fireplace in her parents' parlor. One crisp February evening, Fletcher invited Katherine for a sleigh ride. The snow sparkled under the moonlight as they glided across the open fields outside town, wrapped in thick blankets against the cold. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said, his breath clouding in the winter air. "A dangerous pastime," Katherine teased gently. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "The Petersons have offered me a permanent position, foreman of their horse operation." Katherine turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "That would mean staying in Silver Creek." "It would," he agreed. "If I had reason enough to stay." The sleigh moved silently through the snow as Katherine gathered her courage. "And do you have reason enough?" Fletcher guided the horses to a stop beside a frozen creek, the same one where they had sat together on that tumultuous June day. He set the brake and turned to face her fully. "Katherine," he began, his voice low and earnest, "when I saw you that day at the church, something inside me knew I had to help you. I didn't expect, I never imagined." "What didn't you imagine?" she prompted gently when he faltered. "That helping you would lead me to finding myself again," he finished. "Your letters this past year, they've been like finding pieces of my soul I thought were lost in the war." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Oh, Fletcher." He took her gloved hand in his. "I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer you the life Edgar might have, but I can offer you honesty and hard work and a heart that's yours completely if you'll have it." "Is this a proposal, Mr. Jameson?" Katherine asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "It is," he affirmed. "Though I understand if it's too soon, after everything." Katherine leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, silencing his doubts with a kiss that spoke volumes. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathless, their faces flushed despite the cold. "I think," Katherine said, "that sometimes life takes us on unexpected journeys to lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Fletcher's smile was like the sunrise. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." They were married that spring, in a simple ceremony in the town's small church. The irony of returning to the same building where she had faced her greatest humiliation wasn't lost on Katherine, but this time, everything was different. As she walked down the aisle toward Fletcher, her heart was full and certain. The townsfolk who had once whispered behind their hands now smiled genuinely, won over by Catherine's grace in adversity and Fletcher's quiet integrity. After the ceremony, as they walked hand in hand down the church steps into the bright May sunshine, Katherine couldn't help but think of that moment nearly a year ago when Fletcher had extended his hand to her and said, "Let's start walking." "What are you smiling about, Mrs. Jameson?" Fletcher asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just thinking about journeys," she replied, squeezing his hand, "and how the most important ones often begin with a single step." They made their home on a small piece of land Fletcher purchased adjacent to the Peterson Ranch, building a modest but comfortable house with their own hands. Katherine continued teaching at the school, her natural affinity with children blossoming into a respected career. Fletcher's work with horses gained him a reputation throughout the territory, and by 1881, he had established a small but thriving business breeding and training quality mounts for ranchers and the occasional cavalry officer. In the spring of 1882, they welcomed their first child, a daughter with her father's thoughtful eyes and her mother's determined spirit. As Katherine watched Fletcher cradle their newborn with reverent care, she marveled at the twisting path that had led her here to this man, this love, this life. "I never thanked Edgar," she said suddenly. Fletcher looked up, confused. "For what?" "For not showing up that day," Katherine explained. "If he had, I would have married him, and I would never have known what real love feels like." Fletcher crossed to where she sat by the window, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. He knelt beside her chair and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I thank him every day," he murmured against her skin. As the years passed, Silver Creek grew and changed with the territory. The railroad came through in 1886, bringing new opportunities and faces. Katherine and Fletcher added to their family a son in 1884 and twin girls, unexpected blessings in 1887. They weathered hardships, 2 drought years that threatened the ranch, a fire that damaged the school, the passing of Katherine's father. But through it all, they faced life as they had begun their journey, side by side, one step at a time. On a warm June evening in 1890, Katherine and Fletcher sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. 12 years had passed since that fateful day at the church. "Any regrets?" Fletcher asked, taking her hand in his. Katherine looked at their intertwined fingers, his calloused from years of working with horses, hers marked with the inevitable signs of a life fully lived. "Not one," she replied with absolute certainty. "Every step led me to you." Fletcher's smile, once so rare, now came easily. "Then let's keep walking," he said, echoing words spoken long ago. And they did, through all the seasons of their lives, the abandoned bride and the cowboy who had offered his hand when she needed it most, writing their love story across the changing landscape of the American West.